Hi everybody, welcome to session 3 of our autumn homegroup course, thinking about emotionally healthy spirituality. We've been thinking about some of the themes that Pete Scazzero raises in his books on emotionally healthy spirituality. This week in week 3, I'm going to talk about, so in week 1 we talked about no self, week 2 we talked about no weakness, and this week, week 3, we're going to think about knowing power. One of the most stimulating chapters I read was in this book, The Emotionally Healthy Leader. And he's got this fascinating chapter in here about the use of power. Because he acknowledges that Christians historically are not very good with power. Humans historically are not very good with power and often tend to abuse it. But the thing that struck me in this chapter is he notes that actually power is not something for the few. Power is something that we all have. I was like, wow, okay, wait there. What does he mean by that? And he defines power like this. He says, the most elegantly simple description of power I know is this: power is the capacity to influence. Power is the capacity to influence. That is all that we're talking about when we're talking about power, the capacity to influence somebody else, and we all have it. He says, to a greater or lesser degree, everyone has influence, which means everyone has power, and we all use that power, well or poorly, for good or for ill. And then in the book he describes a number of different kinds of power, which I'll kind of outline for you before we chat about this. So we all have power. We all have this capacity to influence, whether we're aware of it, whether we're sort of emotionally aware that we have that or not yet. And here are the 5 things that he cites. The first one he says is some people have what's called positional power. And that is really the power to influence that you have based on your sort of your role or your title. So the most obvious example is in the workplace. You may have a position of power because that's your job, and you get to tell other people what to do. You get to influence their behaviour. You may have positional power because you're the leader of the small group, and you get to set the agenda. You decide what you're going to do when, what you're going to talk about, what are the main elements of your meeting. There's a power that comes with position, and the Bible recognises that. So in Hebrews 13, the author says in verse 17, have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority, because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. So the Bible recognises positional power. God gives different people in different times and places positions by which they have a responsibility and this capacity to influence. Second type of power is what Pete Scazzero calls gift power. Gift power is really the capacity to influence you have based on your gifts, your personality, your abilities. So, for example, you may be in the music team at church, and you may not have role power, positional power. You may not be the leader of the music group, but you may have a high degree of capacity to influence because of your technical skill or expertise. You may have knowledge such that you bring something to bear because of that. Again, in a small group context, you may have done a theological training course, you may have done some further study or read some fat books, and so though you may not be have the positional power of small group leader, you may actually, by virtue of your gifts and abilities, have this power, this capacity to influence. That's kind of gift power. Again, Romans 12 talks about this idea, I think, where it says, look, we all have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy. If it's serving, then serve. If teaching, then teach. If encouraging, give encouragement. If it's giving, give generously. If it's leading, do it diligently. If it's mercy, do it cheerfully. So we all have some sort of gift, this idea of gift power. Some of us have projected power. This is the third category. This is slightly different. This is more the power that others project on you for any number of reasons. It may be because you have one of the other types of power, gift power or positional power. It may be because they trust your opinion, they respect you, and so there's a sort of a projected power. That one's a little more tricky, I think, as he talks about in the book. That's less easy to identify. Not always that legitimate, but it's kind of there to be aware of. The fourth kind of power he talks about is relational power. So again, this is the capacity to influence you have, not because of a position, not because of your gift, but because of relationship. In some ways, perhaps the most significant. You don't influence people because they have to listen to you because you're the boss. It's the listen because they want to listen to you because you're a friend or you're a family member. And I think this is perhaps the most common sort of power, because all of us will have this. All of us will have this capacity to influence, this power with our family or with a few friends, where we respect their opinion, we respect what they have to say, they might respect what we have to say. And so we exercise this kind of capacity to influence, this power in those relationships. I think that's probably what James is talking about. We're looking at James on Sunday mornings, where James says at the end of his letter, if one of you should wander from the truth, someone should bring that person back. And remember, whoever turns a sinner from the error of their way will save them from death and cover a multitude of sins. It's not a church leader who's necessarily sent to bring them back. It's not necessarily the person with the gift in theology sent to bring them back. It's, look, somebody who has this relational influence should go and get that person and bring them back. So I think lots of us have this, and this one's perhaps more significant than we think it is. And the fifth one he identifies is cultural power. And cultural power is really the power that exists, or again, this capacity to influence that exists because of a certain cultural value. So I guess in some cultures, I think our culture's probably lost it, sadly. Older people had a cultural power. Sort of the elders in a society, in a culture, were rightly revered, were rightly listened to. They had this power and this capacity to influence because of their age and their experience. I think we've sadly probably lost some of that in our own culture, but maybe it still exists. Hopefully it's something we can kind of work on as church family. And I think the Bible recognises this too in 1 Timothy 5 verse 1. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters. There's this sort of this cultural relationship. And Pete Scazzero, having outlined those 5 different ways in which power, the capacity to influence, exists, really then kind of finishes by saying, often in our world and our culture, we use power over people. And the biblical model is to kind of use power under people, as in to use power to serve. So Mark 10:45, where Jesus says, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. And so I guess the challenge for us is to do a couple of things, really. It's to identify and be honest about the places we do have real power, real capacity to influence, observe where they lie in our own lives, and then to think about, and how do we use that? How do we discharge that responsibility in service and well-being of others? So your group leader has some questions, and hopefully this proves to be a helpful and encouraging chat.